Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, John Clark, and Scott Cosenza. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. The ridiculousness of Joe Biden's inability to commit to either Israel or the pro-Palestinian mob is getting worse by the day. The administration does not want the Israeli Defense Force to hit Rafah, a known location where the remaining terrorist organization is holed up because of what could be an unacceptable loss of civilians. It seems the administration has alternative ways to address the war, dismantle Hamas, and make everybody happy. Whoever has this magic plan of action might want to pull it out of wherever it was stashed. It's been 8 months, folks. Let's hear some strategy. And of course, we'd all like to know what the big plan is all about. Dave?
It doesn't matter, Sarah, whether it's support for Israel or resistance to Ukraine. The Biden administration has no plan, no strategy, no clear understanding of an objective. This lack of geopolitical situation awareness has been a lasting feature of the Biden administration. Everything the Biden administration has done up to this point, in its what I refer to as the jello-clad versus ironclad commitment to Israel and their life and death struggle, which is really what it is in defeating the terrorist organization Hamas, has been prefaced with "don't kill any civilians." But even the Biden administration admits that the murderous Hamas organization, they hide behind civilians. So it's pretty difficult to kill Hamas without collateral damage. And, this feckless national security team Biden has is, it views every national crisis through a political lens, which leaves the American people as the losers. Biden worries about deaths of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, but he holds up the delivery of precision-guided weapons that reduce collateral damage. This, could easily force the Israel Defense Force to use less precise weapons, which will have a potential for greater civilian deaths. And they speak with forked tongue. Secretary of State has reaffirmed U.S. support for ensuring an end to Hamas and ensuring that there will be no Hamas government in Gaza. And yet, he says that they won't support the ferreting out and destroying Hamas terrorist battalions in Rafah. As you point out, the last vestige, there's 4 Hamas battalions are dug in. And the national security advisor, he talks to Israeli counterpart, emphasizing once again that they need to destroy Hamas, but with fewer civilian casualties. And, if there were alternatives, which he suggests there are, why this brain trust in the White House has not mentioned those alternatives with fewer civilian casualties while destroying Hamas, why they haven't mentioned them over the last 8 months, just demonstrates that what they're proposing is anything but ironclad. It's confusing and contradictory, and it's why you have people rioting on our university campuses without knowing why.
Oh, Andrew, this is Joe Biden's kinder, gentler 2.0 way of governing, but don't you see that we're all just going to hug it out? Or are they just stalling? Are they stalling, perhaps?
2 letters. Oil. I'm joking. It's 3 letters. I know it's 3 letters. I'm trying to paraphrase Joe Biden, but no, we're not. That's the major thing for Joe Biden right now in his foreign policy is that he wants to stall. He wants to make sure to escalate because of oil prices. I mean, you see the on again, off again war risk premium in the energy markets. You see the Brent and WTI. They're struggling at $80 because investors have no clue what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, is it going to escalation? Is it going to de-escalate. Who knows what's happening? But overall, it does not surprise me if the Biden White House is stalling. Many hardcore progressives, they're struggling to support Biden because of Israel, which is why the administration is probably tergiversating on its position on the Israeli issue. But if you look at some of the polling data, despite Biden's abysmal rating on a whole range of issues, including foreign policy, you see, let's say the Pew Research Center, they said that for most Americans, they want Biden to focus on domestic issues. I think it was 83%, I believe it is more important for Biden to concentrate on domestic policy compared to 14% who say he should focus on foreign policy. Now, when Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, when they're struggling to fill their gas tanks, when they're slipping into delinquency rates, which was highlighted in the recent New York Fed quarterly report, why would they care what's happening 2,000 miles across the globe? Why would they care of what's happening between Iran, Israel, Gaza, the Palestinians? They don't care about that. They care about, well, guess what? The kitchen table economics. I know that's I can't say it's a trope to say that these days, but that's what they focus on.
Well, what would happen? Let's just say, Biden takes a stand or doesn't. But what happens if he just says, "Hey, you guys work it out. We're backing off. I'm not going to support any of you." What would happen, Scott?
Well, as a libertarian, I love that. I love that idea that the United States citizens whose compelled tax payments are used to buy these weapons, that we only use those weapons in defense of our interests. And I don't mean that writ large, broadly across the world, but directly in defense of our own territory against aggressors. That's what seems to me to be the constitutional way to proceed. And I would just say, back to your sort of initial point in this segment, Sarah, I disagree that Biden is vacillating or somehow we can't track what he's up to. It's very clear. He's committed with 100% of his effort to re-election. And whoever he can support in furtherance of that, I think that's the way to process it. It's just, these are just pieces on a chessboard. It's like a risk game for those who know the board game. It doesn't matter. It's whatever accrues to his reelection. And I think that what you asked me, though, would probably not accrue to his reelection, meaning, broadly speaking, conservatives seem to be on the let's fully fund Israel's defense or offense, however you want to say it. And for so many on the left, it is the opposite. Maybe not even just withhold funding, but not necessarily fund Hamas, but fund other economic activity in Gaza to kind of bolster that population. So, but it seems like if we take our founders' vision of liberty, which international struggles and wars should we entangle ourselves with? I don't see why we should with this one. The Israelis seem quite capable of handling things themselves. It's to their detriment that they're on our, they're kind of leeching off us and dependent on us. If they had their own weapons factories, that they didn't have to, to deal with us for these things, they wouldn't have to bother with our domestic politics in their defense.
I have one question. Sorry, Sarah, I have one question. Sorry. Dave, what do you think of what Scott just said? We're going to have a huge thing right now.
Well, obviously, Scott takes the libertarian view where there's one person that exists in all of the universe. And as long as there is that one person, then a libertarian point of view is perfectly acceptable. But as soon as there are two people, then there have to be compromises and there have to be ways in which they come together or stay apart. I think that Scott's point of view is one that clearly articulates a libertarian point of view that says, I live in a world that is not interactive. There are no transactions, and consequently, I can do pretty much what I want. That simply is not a reality.
Well, Reagan, Dave, if you read the Reagan diary,
hold on just one second, Andrew. Let me just say this. If there's only no one person in the world, we don't need libertarianism, because the principle and animating aspect of libertarianism is what's called the non-aggression principle, which is that you keep your hands to yourself. And if you're the only person in the world, that's not necessary. It's only when there are two or more people that it becomes important, if we all want to live in a society where we get to think and do what we please without other people using might is right. That's where the principle of non-aggression comes into play. And for instance, in I think it's Israel and Gaza represents a perfect example. What's the right line in terms of going after populations? What is an acceptable civilian casualty loss? I don't know. I know what it would be for me if America was attacked. But to weigh in on that definitively, and I'm a high information voter, and I can tell you that I don't have a good sense of it. The idea that the rest of my neighbors know, and I know that they don't, they're on team either you sympathize with the plight of the Israelis, generally speaking, or you sympathize with the plight of the Palestinians, generally speaking. That seems to be the gist of it. And it just is a poor use for our extracted, compelled payments of tax dollars. Let's not, it's not Joe Biden sending his money over there. He's holding a gun to you and me and everybody else and sending our money over there. And I think that the people who are sour about that have every right to be sour about it.
All right, we need to bring John Clark into this. I know he wants to say something. I mean, he's been doing the side eye to Scott yammering here. So
I have not made any. I've just thought about how I'm in the awkward position of being the mediator between the Liberty Nation Libertarian faction and the lone wolf conservative, Mr. Patterson. And so I'm going to try to, as a mediator, take a middle road, which is that, and be more responsive to the question. I think that it's interesting the dispute in Israel is more splintering the left than the right, as you've pointed out, as far as how this impacts our voting. But I also think that there might be a certain naivete, and I am not discounting libertarian arguments here, with which I'm very persuaded. But if Biden is weak and his wheelhouse is a weather vane on the border policies, as Dave mentioned, on just about everything. He's trying to get votes and trying to play both sides of this, emboldens the enemies, not just of Israel, but of America. And if that results in a deterioration there, it could very much impact our elections, Andrew, because it could in fact impact something called oil prices. There are many choke points there. So I think there are a lot of wild cards there that could directly impact our interests. And I'm not advocating necessarily for colonialism, but there is an existing structure there that needs to be preserved, because an imbalance in the Middle East could have profound impacts for Americans. And that 80% who don't care about foreign affairs will a lot if they have to wait in line to fill up their gas tank, or if it goes to $10 a gallon overnight. So it's hard to extricate these various philosophical ideas from boots on the ground. And I think that, Blinken, I think today said, Israel has to stay out of Gaza, and he doesn't have an alternative plan, as Dave points out. This is just untenable either for Israel or the Middle East. It really is, in a way, taking sides with Iran, who are allying with Russia and other powers. This is a scary scenario. While we're quibbling over our domestic issues, what's going on in the Middle East and around the world is a very real threat to us, regardless of our political philosophy.
And to put John's point in slightly differently, yeah, there are a lot of things going on, and there are a lot of balls in the air, but it adds to the complexity. And when societies and communities and countries become extremely complex and are dealing day to day with transactions with other nations, then the libertarian point of view tends to be less appealing in terms of actually making things happen and getting things done. And I think that's where we are with Israel. And unfortunately, we have an administration that does not know how to get things done or make things happen, because they have no objectives, they have no strategy, and their worldview is confusing and contradictory. And that's, I think, where we are.
The libertarian view of getting things done is to get our butt out of a conflict we have no business being in, and that is getting something done.
But here's the reality. Here's the reality situation. No matter what happens, no matter what side you support, whether the continued interventionism or to stay out of the conflict altogether, the economics is going to force you to retreat and go back home. The U.S. cannot afford anything. Interest payments already exceeding defense spending. National debt is swallowing the economy. You look at the CBO numbers. You see how the deficit is growing, and national debt's going to reach $52 trillion in the next 10 years, or 10 years. The U.S. is not going to be able to afford this extravagant foreign policy anymore. So no matter whether you continue want to have all these wars, you want to be engaged in adventurism, the U.S. simply cannot afford it.
Andrew, I don't think it's a question of wanting, and that's my point. You can not want anything you don't want, but the enemy has a vote in all of this. And it's what happened in 9/11. The enemy voted against us, and the enemy votes against us daily. And to not recognize that, and to not recognize that that is part of the complexity of international relationships is, I think, Pollyannish and a fool's errand.
But when you say
All
who
right,
doesn't
guys,
want, are you kidding me? I think everyone in Washington wants, or I'll say a majority want continued war in the Middle East. Sorry,
We're going to wrap this up, guys. And that means the Biden budget must make some tough decisions. It also means the president must make his words and actions match, because sending confusing, many might call them waffling messages, could make the situation in Israel worse, not better, let alone on our own shores. Thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.